I'm a project guru with Objective Consulting. And a lot of what we do for our clients is help them understand how to access the data that they already have using means that they may want. That may be voice, that may be new web or mobile interfaces, but increasingly we are seeing that it's voice. One of the things we did about 6 years ago as part of this was to pilot something for Google Glass that was a visual to-do list built with a Google spreadsheet behind it. So users would be able to both read and write to this spreadsheet, a to-do list on this spreadsheet, using Glass, but also have access to it from their desktop and from their mobile devices. This was a visual to-do list, or Voodoo. The project has evolved since then. When voice came along, we eventually moved it to just focus on spreadsheets because we realized that spreadsheets themselves were an incredibly powerful, universal interface. We all know how to use spreadsheets. We all know how to structure data in spreadsheets. And spreadsheets themselves contain their own structure. The spreadsheet defines the structure of the data that's in it. And one of the powerful things we can do with Voodoo is use that structure to help understand the data that it also contains. Now, normally when I do this kind of presentation, I actually have a Google Assistant up here with me, and I do live demonstrations. But for this voice conference, they wanted more visual than voice. So instead, we're going to see a bunch of narration bubbles. So the easiest thing to do would be to go and ask, hey Google, ask Voodoo Drive to open my weight. My weight being one of the files that we've saved in a folder on Google Drive that we've permitted Voodoo access to. And it will respond, I've opened the spreadsheet named my weight. What would you like to do? Perfectly common, normal things to do. And note, I don't need to be looking at the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet itself doesn't need to be open on a desktop or anywhere. It just needs to be there in Google's cloud, ready for us to talk to it. It's okay, I've opened the spreadsheet, now what? I will ask, well, what's the weight? And it could answer, the value of weight is 187. What would you like to do next? Okay, I've now asked for data that's in the spreadsheet and gotten it out. I haven't seen a thing, and if that's all I wanted, I now have the information that I need right out of my spreadsheet. But if I did open the spreadsheet, this is what it might look like. We have a few rows, we have columns that are labeled, and we know that it's taken the data from the last line because when we use spreadsheets in this kind of a way, we typically want to go to the last line. Voodoo Drive understands the context of what a spreadsheet is to know that the last line usually contains the data that we want when we're doing this kind of query, and that the first row of data usually contains the column headers. And it uses those headers to help understand what we're asking about. In this case, I was asking about weight, and it was returning that information. But now today is today, I want to add a new row. So I'll ask it to add a new row. And it will tell me, a new row? Great, you got it. What do you want to do next? And again, I don't have to look at the spreadsheet, but if I did, I would see that it has added a row. And it knows that the first column, since it had date values previously, it can just populate it with the current date and time, which it's done. It's also copied formulas and layout from the previous row. So the last column, which is a formula, it's copied that formula into the next box. But it also knows that some columns are ones where I'm adding the data. So it doesn't copy that data because it's expecting me to add that data, which I'm about to do. And I will say to set my weight to 188. Okay, I've set your weight to 188. What do you want to do? Well, probably I want to say, well, what are the values now? How am I doing? And it will tell me, well, for today's date, because it's on that row, that was the last row we were working with, here's what your weight, and the weight change is 1. What do you want to do? If we looked at the spreadsheet, we'll see that it's been populated. And the formatting has been copied over, the formula has been copied over, all the data is there. Now, honestly, I want to fib. I don't really like the fact that I gained a pound yesterday, so I'm just going to tell it, why don't we change it to 186? And it will tell me, sure, I've set weight to 186. It doesn't have a conscious. That's up to me. What would you like to do? But note that I said change it to 186. I didn't tell it what to change. Again, it had context. It had understanding of what we were talking about. I had already set weight to something, and now I'm saying change it. So it tells me it's changed the weight, and lo and behold, if we actually were looking at the spreadsheet, we would have seen that it populated the weight live. That context references to it, knowing that we're working on the last row, and that when we add a row, that's the next row that we're likely to want to work on. These are the things about context and data that we all should be thinking about as we're designing our systems. And it's at the core of what we were doing with Voodoo. We understood the context of the sheet itself, knowing what sheets were, how we tended to use it, and what the headers at the top of them mean, which ones are important to copy, which fields are not, and then understand the context specifically of each entry as we're giving it along. Now, saying it step by step can sometimes be complicated, having it going along like that, having to remember to open it and add a row. So really what I want to do is I kind of want to say, hey, Google, ask Voodoo Drive to add a row to my weight. And in these kinds of cases, it will say, okay, I've added a row to my weight. What would you like to set weight to? And here's a case where it, again, has additional context about how we're doing it. If we're invoking it directly, what Google calls a deep link, then it has a couple of additional things that it's assuming. Not only is it going to be adding the row, but it knows that we're going to be wanting to fill in some of those values. So it starts prompting us to fill in those values immediately. If I had multiple columns with values, I could specify certain ones to skip over, go in a different order perhaps, but it will try to maintain an order going across the spreadsheet. Again, understanding the context, understanding how we work with rows. But even that is too long. That's a kind of a mouthful to say. What I really just want to say is, hey, Google, record my weight. We can do this with Google because we can set up what they call a routine. And a routine, at its simplest, is just a phrase that we have and what we want Google to do when we say that phrase. So here, once again, I've just given it a routine, a simple phrase, and it goes and does it. This is simple, and this is actually part of my routine every day. Is I go in, I step on the scale, I step off, and I say, hey, Google, record my weight. What else can we do? Well, it's a spreadsheet. That's one of the great things about spreadsheets, is they're incredibly flexible, incredibly powerful, and more people know how to program a spreadsheet than they do any other programming language. So people already understand where they're starting from, what kind of context they're building in, and we meet them halfway. We meet them at that context. So we can say things like, as I'm driving off from a gas station, I can say I've put gas in my car, and it will prompt me, what's your mileage? How many gallons did you put in? How much did you pay? And a host of calculations flow from there because that was all in a spreadsheet. I can ask what the value of my portfolio is. And with Google's automatic calculations that can pull in data from the web, the last line of my spreadsheet has that information already at hand. More importantly, it has that information from my father already at hand, so he can do it. And he can fiddle with his portfolio spreadsheets however he wants. I can record my workout. The same thing. Have it prompt me, how many sit-ups did you do? How many push-ups? And all of that can become a daily summary. What are we looking forward to? Again, with a spreadsheet, there are lots of things that we can do. We want to be able to build more complicated queries over time and say things like, what is the value from the last quarter? What formulas are involved in doing that? And how do we build spreadsheets that understand that can put that in for you? What is the result when the rate is 10? If we change one value, what do we get out of it? How can we do what-if scenarios, which spreadsheets are amazingly useful at, just the way that we've asked for it? But most importantly, what do you want? What can you do with a spreadsheet? And the answer is you can do lots and lots of amazing things. And what we'd like to do with Voodoo Drive, and what I would like to do in helping you understand that context, is help you answer the questions that you have about your data. Thank you very much.